Hello and welcome back to our journey through the solar system. Today we're continuing our journey through the outer solar system with a stop at Saturn. Now Saturn is the ringed planet. In fact, it's not the only planet that has rings, but clearly Saturns are far and away the best. Saturn is named after the Roman god of wealth and agriculture, but unlike the other planets, there isn't a direct Greek god that is kind of the equivalent. The Greek religious equivalent was actually a Titan named Cronus, who's actually the father of Zeus, among others. Like Jupiter, Saturn is a gas giant. However, it is slightly smaller, probably because it formed a little bit later in the life of the solar system, when there wasn't quite as much hydrogen and helium around to accrete onto Saturn and give it as much mass. It weighs in at about 95 times the mass of the Earth, and its radius is about 9.5 times the mass of the Earth, without the rings. In fact, the average density of Saturn is only about 687 kilograms per meter cubed, which is less than the density of water. Saturn is the least dense planet in the entire solar system. Saturn is also the most oblate of all the planets. That is, it has the biggest difference between its equatorial radius and its polar radius. It's a difference of about 10% for Saturn. This is because it has such a low density and it spins so fast. Its sidereal day is only about 10.5 hours. So like Jupiter, Saturn is composed primarily of hydrogen and helium, and it also has enough pressure that this hydrogen becomes metallic at a certain point in the interior. And then with heavier elements that sink further in and become sequestered in the core. However, unlike Jupiter, Saturn seems to have actually a pretty solid core rather than the diffuse fuzzy core that Jupiter has. And again, like Jupiter, Saturn is covered with a cloud layer that's made of primarily ammonia clouds. There's also some differentiation at latitudes, which leads to some banding of Saturn. However, this is pretty faint. In fact, we didn't see the banding of Saturn until we had sent a flyby probe there. We can see it now from Earth with our current telescopes, but at the time, the telescopes here on Earth were not strong enough to see this banding, so it just looked more smooth. The biggest moon of Saturn is a moon called Titan, and it's basically comparable to the Galilean moons of Jupiter in size. It's very massive. It actually has a substantial atmosphere. It's the only moon in the solar system that we know of that has an atmosphere. But it's not the only moon of Saturn. In fact, Saturn has 82 known moons. Quite a lot. Now, poor Saturn is often compared a lot to Jupiter, its kind of bigger gas giant sibling. But while Jupiter might be the king of planets, Saturn is the king of the rings, so to speak. Saturn's rings extend over 120,000 kilometers away from the planet, and they're only 20 meters thick on average, which is a really, really crazy difference in the thickness compared to the distance. While the rings might look rather solid, they're actually just composed of individual, very small particles, primarily of ice, but also of dust and other particulate matter. And the density of these particles changes as you travel through the rings, due to various reasons such as resonances and the presence of some of these sorts of shepherd moons within the rings. Now, it's not known how old the rings of Saturn are. It used to be somewhat accepted that they were probably created alongside Saturn, and so they would be, billions of years old. But actually more recent data has been suggested to point to the fact that the rings might be as young as 10 million years old, which is really quite young in the timescale of the solar system. In any case, the rings are losing mass, and at the current rate which they're losing mass, we expect them to survive another 300 million years or so. So in the cosmological scheme of things, we are very lucky to be alive to witness these beautiful, beautiful rings that Saturn has, because they won't be around forever. It's also not known exactly how these rings formed in the first place. They might just be leftover material that didn't quite make it into Saturn when Saturn was forming. Or it could be, say, a moon that got destroyed, and then this is kind of the debris of that moon that's left in orbit around Saturn. The rings are mysterious and beautiful. Now, Saturn is quite far away. In fact, it's almost twice as far from the sun as Jupiter is. And for this reason, it's not nearly as bright as the other planets that we've discussed. In fact, it's only the 9th brightest object in the night sky on average. Its brightness actually also tends to change quite a bit, as it depends on the orientation of how the rings are facing us, because these rings are very wide but very narrow, so depending on how much of them we see, how much light gets reflected from Saturn. Even so, Saturn is easily visible by eye, and it has been observed since prehistoric times, like the other planets that we have talked about. So Galileo, of course, tried to observe Saturn through his telescope in 1610, the very first telescope ever used. In fact, his telescope was not powerful enough to even see the rings of the rings of Saturn. He could tell that there was something there, but he thought that they were actually moons of Saturn, and it wasn't until cassini-huygens and a more powerful telescope in 1659 that the rings were first discovered, along with the moon Titan. Other early observers include Giovanni Cassini, who first observed the gap in the rings of Saturn, which we nowadays call the Cassini division, in addition to discovering 4 more moons of Saturn. Saturn, being even farther away than Jupiter, has been difficult to observe in situ, but there have been 3 probes that flew by Saturn. The first being NASA's Pioneer 11, which was launched in 1973 and flew by Saturn in 1979. Contact with Pioneer 11 was maintained until 1995 when it was lost. Both of the Voyager probes also flew by Saturn, Voyager 1 in 1980 and Voyager 2 in 1981. Saturn has only had one orbiter mission, and that was the cassini-huygens mission, which is often mostly just referred to as Cassini. This was a joint project between NASA, ESA, and ASI, and it launched in 1997 and was placed into Saturnian orbit in 2004. The original mission was planned to go until 2008, but Cassini actually made it all the way until 2017. Because the mission was ending, they were able to take this risk and do these really awesome orbital maneuvers and actually pass through the gaps of the rings of Saturn, which is really amazing. And then, yes, once the mission was over in 2017, Cassini was deorbited and burned up in the Saturn atmosphere, again, to prevent any possible contamination of the moons. Now, the Huygens portion of the mission was actually a module that actually detached from Cassini and parachuted onto the surface of the moon Titan in 2005. Among many other wonderful things, Cassini gave us some amazing images of the really cool hexagonal structure at Saturn's pole, which has been observed for many, many years. I mean, it's probably some sort of standing wave within the atmosphere, so pretty awesome. So Saturn, with its beautiful rings and its bevy of moons, is a really awesome addition to our solar system. I hope you enjoyed traveling there with me today, and I hope you will join us again next time for Uranus. All right, thanks for watching. Have a good one. Bye!